Okay, so for all you newbies, ACORN is a tenants union for low and moderate income Nova Scotians. ACORN does exist across Canada, though, and in the United States, but we have a Nova Scotia chapter. And then we have chapters based on location. So there's a Halifax Peninsula chapter, there's one in Fairview, there's one in Dartmouth, several. And people can be part of like the one that's to their location, but also part of the larger provincial one. And it is mainly about fighting for tenants' rights issues. So for the decency of homes, for the affordability of homes, for tenants' rights themselves against eviction and against rent evictions and rent increases. But we also do other things that simply help the same group of people. So we have like a mutual aid organization element. We have a trading post. We're starting to do little social nights now in my chapter at the Halifax Peninsula. And we also have an Internet for All campaign. So there are some associated sort of issues that serve the same people, but mainly it is about rental rights. Yeah. Did that cover it? Am I missing anything? I feel like we do so much, but and anyone who hasn't signed the form, please sign the form. Maybe just send it again, Sid, because anyone who came in can't see the old chat. Yeah. So Sid just put a form in the chat. Please, please, please sign it. And with that, I will pass it to Sid for landlord licensing.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, well, I'll quickly go through, ACORN's, what we're calling the Defend Our Homes campaign. And so that is the landlord licensing and minimum standards. Obviously, I'm sure I know a lot of people here know that the situation in rental housing across the HRM is abysmal. Apartments are falling apart. We have minimum standards bylaws, which is, leaps and bounds ahead of some other cities, but they don't go far enough. The enforcement aspect is just not there. And so really what happens is we see like buildings that are absolutely falling apart. Tenants are living in, unbelievable conditions across this city, and there's no enforcement mechanism, punishment, any sort of, adequate system in order to keep these landlords in check. So, back in the early 2000s, ACORN actually invented the concept of landlord licensing. It was, drawn up and written by our members. And since then, we've won it in a bunch of cities across Canada, which we'll go into a bit closer to the end here. But the demands more or less remain the same across cities. And so what we're demanding here is that the city license all new and existing rental units, landlords, and property managers in the entire HRM in a free, publicly accessible database, that they create protections against landlords remitting the cost of licensing onto tenants, which, is obviously difficult in a province with no rent control, but we'll go into later, the cost of licensing completely is outweighed by the benefits, and it's really honestly minimal to tenants. It would ensure that random annual inspections by the city of rental units and buildings would happen so that you can force the standards laid out in bylaw M200, and it would keep units from falling into disrepair. We're also advocating for those inspections to happen when the building changes hands, property management companies, there's any sort of sale, right? Just to ensure that the prior landlord is held accountable and we don't get things kind of like we saw out at Nivens Avenue, if anybody's familiar with that action that we did for landlord licensing. The building was falling into absolute disrepair. And really what the landlord had said was, well, I had just bought the building back in, January or February, and it was falling apart when I got it. So, I can't be held accountable for anything that was going on because it's not my fault. This would ensure that that doesn't happen. And it would also create proactive inspections, because the last thing that we're calling for as part of this is an anonymous reporting system for bylaw infractions. Every other city in Canada has some sort of anonymous reporting system. The framework is there. You can make anonymous health complaints when it comes to health and safety standards for workplaces, for restaurants, other businesses. So when they say that they can't do an anonymous enforcement system for landlords, it just doesn't make any sense, right? And what we see, and I know we have members here today who have experienced this, is when you attach your name to the bylaw complaint and it becomes obvious that you have made that complaint, landlords do retaliate. And there are a lot of instances, and this is a whole other teach-in, there are a lot of holes in the Residential Tenancies Act that while it does protect against retaliation, there's so many loopholes. They're really able to get away with a lot just because there are very few protections for renters in this province. But that's a whole other thing. It's why we need an anonymous reporting system. And I can turn it back to Hannah to talk about, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm looking at the agenda here. We'll talk a bit later about like where else we see holes in the system and what needs to happen. But I'll turn it over to Mila, who's going to go over, what landlord licensing is looking like right now, what City Council is proposing, and then going a bit more into our position.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Does anybody have any questions for Sid, either here or in the chat before we continue the agenda? I think Is someone trying to speak? Okay. All right, I'm gonna pass it to Mila then to talk about where landlord licensing is through City Council right now. And if you do have any questions, just put them in the chat at any time. You don't have to wait for the breaks.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah and Sid. So landlord licensing right now, on September 30th, bylaw M201 passed one of its readings in council, and it passed unanimously. So like the council is like in favor of this, but it's kind of falls short on what we're asking for. So what it does, it's going to add a classification for rental units and buildings. It's going to increase fire protections written into the bylaw. So mandatory alarms and forcing landlords to update systems, which is like, that's great. It's going to add noise requirements and bylaws, and it's going to have a new clause that keeps landlords and tenants from disconnecting the electric, which like during the winter, or if someone is like sick and has like machinery, medical machinery, this is all like really important. So it also strengthens the minimum standards, which is great, but overall there isn't really a lot to enforce anything that's in this bylaw. In April of next year, there's going to be the proposed registration system. So there's going to be no charge for registration, is what we're hearing is the proposal, because councillors are afraid that landlords will push the cost onto tenants, which I think says a lot about even how council recognizes sort of the predatory nature of especially larger landlords and property management companies. They say that currently the bylaw responds to 80% of the bylaw office responds to 80% of complaints, and the fire department only does 20% of inspections. That's the numbers they gave us. They do all inspections in buildings with 4 or more stories. And that might be why like high rises are being reported as having less infractions or less reported infractions. They're not going to prioritize inspecting high-rise buildings because of that, because according to the city, they say that high-rises have the least infractions. I'm not 100% sure that that's actually true, but that's what the city is claiming. In general, we see more problems, or just as many problems, with large property management companies and their buildings. All complaints are under an open data order and will go into public database through the city's website. Right now, it only includes active infractions and cases. So this will that'll expand what is available. So we want to see all past and present cases. That's what our demand is. Inspections will happen based on hotspots, and previous bylaw complaints will also be able to give the city a list of problematic buildings that tenants may have not filed complaints with. So the data will be open source, so people can use it to develop apps. The fine escalation system will be like first offense, $15, second offense, $250, and third offense, $450. That's kind of like really low. A lot of the biggest, like the big problem landlords are like large companies. And so this is kind of like the cost of doing business. Like that would be the cost of, oh, sorry, 150 for the first offense. But like that's like the cost, if not less than the cost of like hiring someone to do the fix. So it's not really like the best incentive for landlords to actually fix the problems. So we're pushing to see that number go up a bit. The city will issue a fine for each offense and can stack them. So the second day they come by, they can choose to escalate to a second offense or issue another first offense. And can come back each day until it's fixed and keep finding them. So these can stack up. They say the city won't have to do more inspections because the threat of public data will keep them in line. Like maybe, I think there should definitely be some teeth to this. What we want to see is that after so many infractions, the building gets taken away from the landlord, and right of first refusal goes to tenants, and then it gets sold to whoever gets sold to. So that's kind of like our demands for landlord licensing. They plan to only do inspections biannually, and for the first few years only prioritize smaller buildings, which I worry that will largely like disproportionately impact smaller landlords, which in my experience, like the smaller landlords tend to be like more accountable to, like, because you know them. So folks who are like running large businesses are harder to get at, and it's harder to hold them accountable. So I feel like that's a bit, and I feel like many people would agree with me, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's kind of not what we're looking for. We're looking to really get at the large offenders for a lot of these problems, like, you know, like the big companies who let pests go wild in their buildings and things like that. They won't have contact information or open data on building owners, and will let property management companies and landlords choose who the contact person should be for the building. We're of the opinion that their information should be publicly available to their tenants. Just like you would generally be able to look at the database for like business owners to find out who owns the restaurant that gets, you know, has a license to run and has the ability, has inspections and such. So we kind of want to see more like more names of the building owner, of the property owners themselves. Consider that cost of doing business. So that's something we want to see changed and like more strict. So and they don't want to inspect building public housing. So they can't inspect public housing. The city can't do that. That's like under the province. So they can't respond to 311 complaints in public housing buildings, which is a huge issue. A lot of public housing is not held up to the standards that other housing already is held up to, like even kind of not really, but you know, so public housing is in many cases even worse than private housing, and it's just because they're not held to building code standards. So we're trying to they're trying to request permission from the province to do so, but the city and the province are in a sort of an ego fight over housing. So what we would definitely like to see is that 311 can enforce bylaws on public housing, especially since those are like public housing is some of the most vulnerable people in our society, and so they definitely deserve a higher level um, of housing than they're getting, for sure. So that is currently where we're at and where we're looking towards. If anyone has any questions.
Am I unmuted? I am, right? I'm gonna speak I'm gonna speak a little bit more to kind of the lackings of the land of what they want as opposed to what we're asking for. So that might answer some questions, but also put them in the chat or so maybe I'll just give a minute for any questions in the chat or by voice before I continue.
I think more of a statement that I would make too is it would definitely be good if there was, more of an incentive for a landlord to keep things up to code, with fines or anything, especially because like in my situation right now, like my unit was given an order in October of last year that said it doesn't meet minimum standards and they were given 30 days to do it. And right now there's still work that's left unfinished and it's been assigned to a new building inspector. But the fact of the matter is that we're approaching a year from the date that order was given. And there's not really any penalty towards the property management company for not complying with the terms of the initial order. Like at this point, they're just like, oh, well, we'll get it done when we get it done. Like I've been waiting at this point a year for a new window to come in the front because it's like the main window in the living room, it gets drafty. And I've been hearing for 6 months now that I'm going to get that new window installed and it still hasn't happened. So it seems like there's no incentive for them to do the work because they think they can get away with not doing it.
Well, they are getting away with not doing it. So would you suggest like a system of time penalty, where every day that goes by, I mean, I think the licensing system that we're trying to do would do that. Like every time someone comes back and the problem is still there, they would get fined. But not sure how to make it any stronger than that. Do you have thoughts, Sid?
Can I add to that?
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So one of the big things that we actually want is for the province to be able to possess the building from the owner if they keep having infractions. So like they will have fine, and after a point, like the ideal landlord licensing situation is to have it so the government can just take the building away from them. And then after that, the tenants, if they're able to afford it, they have the right of first refusal. So they have the chance to like turn the building into a cooperative or buy the house, whatever the situation is. And then if not, then it goes on into the market. The government sells it to someone else, and it becomes like a new owner then takes possession and hopefully doesn't continue the issue, but they would again have those infractions. So that creates far more of an incentive, I feel, than just fines, because fines are a good incentive to be like, if they're expensive enough, to be like, well, it's cheaper to just pay someone to do the work, right? But if someone is notoriously unwilling to do that, and like many landlords seem to be notoriously unwilling to actually do the work, then having that ability for the government to take that building away and offer it to the tenants and then offer it to someone else, that's the most ideal. I think that is really all that's really going to like stop someone from thinking they can get away with just not respecting their tenants.
Yeah. There was a question from Doug that Sid's going to address.
Yeah, so is rent control ever going to happen? What a great question. I'd love to know. Seriously, that's what we've, been demanding from the province for a very long time. We are ACORN is like really leading the fight for rent control in this province, right? It's 100% necessary. as a chapter and as like a provincial group, we've been talking about this quite a bit. I would highly encourage, if you want to take action on this, to come out to a chapter meeting, because you know, we really are planning like a course of action to take on the province, especially after the municipal election. You know, it's really going to start ramping up. But oh boy, is rent control ever going to happen? Yeah, if we have anything to say about it, it sure will. One quick thing that I wanted to just touch on with the previous question on the landlord licensing piece. At the moment, what the city has the power to do is come in after 3 infractions and do the repairs themselves, and then bill the cost of repairs to the landlord. And unfortunately, it's a very rare occurrence, but that is something that the city has the power to do, and is part of what they're proposing with the registration program that they've put in forward.
Okay, so I'm just going to speak a little bit more to landlord licensing as opposed to what's being offered, and Mila already covered a lot of this. But one, we definitely believe that the fines need to start at a higher amount of money, like $150. A plumber or a locksmith or anyone like that doesn't get out of bed for anything less than that to begin with. Like, just to get somebody out costs that. So that's not really relative to the cost of repairs. Like, it's not punitive. And fines, the whole nature of fines is to be punitive. They're not supposed to be manageable. They're supposed to be a deterrent. So there are higher fines for first infractions on things that I think have in other industries that have much less impact on people's health and safety. So we definitely need to fight for the higher fines. And I do think that that's a winnable fight if we continue to put the pressure on between now and April. And that's the thing. I mean, we've been asking for one thing for like 6 years, ACORN has, and they're kind of offering 10% of that whole that we were asking for. So it is going to be a fight between now and then to get the rest of that, or as much of it as we can get. And then even still, when it passes in whatever portion, it's important to understand it's still going to be a fight to make sure the city does what they say they will do. So, not to be discouraging, but it always does take a little bit of stick and pressure with the city to get them to do the things they commit to. But having this basis of law is what we'll be able to build anything off of. So one is the fine structure. I'll address that in just 1 second, Doug. I just want to finish this. So that's one, is the fine amount. That's a gap that we need to close. The other is the anonymous reporting. Now, what they have said is that they can't have, you can't be anonymously reporting because they may have to then deal with you in court. But you could be anonymous until something goes to small claims court. And if it never does, then there's no need for for your identity to ever be known. So we're kind of fighting the idea that anonymity is just a thing that can't happen. We definitely think it can. It happens in other industries. So the anonymity factor we feel is very large. The other one is the licensing itself as a licensing, because registration and licensing are very different things. With licensing, there is a fee paid, which would allow us to hire more bylaw enforcement officers to actually keep up with the licensing's demands. And licensing would allow like a mandatory education, either in a booklet or a half-day course or something. I'm thinking more just written material. But one of the issues that we have with landlords right now is they don't know what they're supposed to know. They don't know the Rentals Tenancy Acts. They, claim ignorance. And so having the licensing, which mandates that they license, they sign, and they receive their education, would take away that loophole of saying, I don't know, or I didn't do it right because I didn't know. So licensing gives it more legitimacy as a profession, which landlords are always saying that they are. They're always saying it's a job. So let's treat it like a job, like we treat so many other jobs, and have licensing. Also, the city saying that they're afraid that the licensing fees will just pass down to tenants. This has been looked at in other cities, and it usually averages out to about $10 extra a unit when they have done that, like when they have passed those costs down. And with all the strengths of landlord licensing, we do feel like the $10 a unit wouldn't be, people would be getting a lot of value for that $10 per unit. But again, they don't have to do that. They can actually, as well, licensing is something, if you have a corporation, that you can write off on your taxes sometimes. So it's like, they don't necessarily have to do that. It's just the city's assumption that they will, because they have a poor opinion of them based on fact. Another element too in the licensing system for the registration is they don't want to have people's names. Most landlords, if they own any significant amount of housing, are incorporated. So this would just add the extra step of going to joint stocks, looking up the corporation and getting their name there. But it would be a lot easier if it was just all in this open source way and not so many hoops. Did I miss anything, Sid?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, and then I wanted to, from Doug, I'm in District 9 for the election. Is there any one candidate that is in line with ACORN's beliefs? There definitely, we did a questionnaire. I think I got to pass that back to Sid because I haven't seen the results yet. Who is best on these issues, Sid, for District 9 anyway?
We did put out a questionnaire with our platform, same with this. We've sent out, or we're in the process of sending out by district. So we're working our way backwards up. So we've done 13, 12, 10, and moving our way in. We're going to put out a questionnaire to all the people running for city council. We'll get their position on that. And then in the next week or so, we'll be publicizing the results of that. And so that information will be all publicly made available, but we don't have it all yet. So I as an organizer, I don't speak for the organization. So we've got to put that to our members and then come back.
But
it's a great question.
Yeah, the questionnaire is formed and all of them will be getting it. So there will be an answer on that. It just doesn't exist yet. Does any, I see here that only districts 1 and 6 were places that didn't get any explicit endorsements from the Labor Council. Yeah. There's definitely going to be some crossover values with what the Labor Council was looking for in their questionnaire and ours, but ours obviously more specific to housing related issues. Another organization that I'm in just got their questionnaires back a couple of days ago, and it was really just like I think there was like 32 people we sent out questionnaires to, and we got like maybe 15 back or something. So I hope we get 100% response from them so that everyone has a chance to be endorsed by us, and then we'll see. JT, are you talking about for District 6? That those are your people? Yeah. Everyone's going to get the questionnaire, so we will see how it comes back with. And that will be, it'll be a discussion based on their answers. So I don't have that for you now, but when we have it, you will have it. Yeah. Maybe it's at some point, how should we get those answers to people who maybe are not going to be in that meeting, Sid? Are you going to publish it somewhere?
Oh yeah, we're going to put it up on the social media. We'll send out an e-blast. So I'll send the form again, but that's a great way to get on our email list, things like that. Just drop it in the chat there.
Yeah, so people will be kept informed, but just trying to get that together. On the 10th of October, we are having an action in the afternoon. I believe, is it 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, Sid?
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. So 1 o'clock on October 10th, we're doing a rally in front of the library. Yep, Sam just put it there. And that is going to be about, talking about landlord licensing, putting pressure on those who are running for council to see this as a serious issue and know that we're going to continue to fight for it. And an opportunity, for people who may not know about ACORN to learn about us as well and get the word out there. So we're doing it at the Central Library because it's a nice public spot. Sid just put the Facebook event up there. So please join us if you can. And I think I've covered the kinds of things that we're missing from licensing. I just think it's really important to understand that once you get a crack open, like once you get the door opened for something, which I think we have with them so far, like I think we got our foot in the door with registration. Now we just need to continue to put the pressure on them to get the full thing that we want. So they made a mistake giving us anything. we're going to take a mile. They gave us an inch, but we're going to take a mile. And I also think it's important for people to realize too that, you know, expecting inspectors for the city to like act against landlords and things like that is not necessarily going to happen. These are people who see each other as colleagues in some ways. So we're going to have to keep the pressure on to make sure that there's real accountability for those who are going into these spaces as well, and that they're not, you know, doing favors and acting nepotistically towards landlords that they like. So the pressure is to get the licensing where we need it to be by April, and then to keep the heat on after to make them realize that we need it actually done. So yeah, does anyone have any questions for me based on that? Hi, Lisa. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. I'll wait another couple of seconds for any questions about that. Yeah.
I just think it's good that would be in place. It's to have a way to vet landlords the same way that they vet tenants it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah. And I mean, think of all the hoops that people have to go through now, like things like credit checks for housing is ridiculous. You know, but where are the checks for landlords and what their histories are? That's also a really important gap. From the registration to the licensing, and Mila mentioned this, that you need to be able to see people's past infractions as well. Because I mean, who else gets breaks like that, where they just get their record wiped clean when they fix it? Individuals don't get that for, you know, for criminal matters. Restaurants don't get that for their infractions. So if other health and safety infractions are kept public and kept searchable, then I don't see why this should be any different.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything else from anybody else? Chat or just speak?
I also kind of just want to add to that, because like one of the big things I think that is often missing from like the government's understanding of this, and a lot of folks don't think about this, but housing is a health issue, right? Like we're the same reason why we have licensing for restaurants is why we should have licensing for housing and for like apartments and things like that. It's because like if there's pests, that's a health issue. If there's mold, that's a health issue. If you end up losing your house because it's falling apart, you're out in the elements, you're homeless, that's a health issue, right? So landlords aren't just business owners, they're not just investors in property. They're actually like, they have power over something that is so essential to our living that it's not just about what we want, we need licensing. We need to have our rights to our housing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be nice if they would just do the right thing because it was the right thing to do, but no such luck, you know, like them talking about how the landlord industry will self-regulate itself. Since when has that ever worked in any way? It's never self-regulated itself for safety. It's never self-regulated itself for general respectful treatment of tenants or for the pricing. So I don't see why that will just never organically happen. That's not a thing. And I don't know if anyone here has ever had mold poisoning, but I have, from a derelict apartment, and it's one of the like worst things you can ever feel. The health hazards for people are very real, and they are impacting people's health both in the short term and in the long term. Especially things that are respiratory issues can have very fast and sometimes fatal effects for people for unsafe housing.
Hi, can I ask a question? This is Heather Kelly. I'm running for council. I'm a current deputy mayor in the Region of Queens municipality. And I came across your event today because I shared it with a lot of renters who are having problems in the region of Queens, everything that you're talking about. But one of the things I want to ask you, and maybe I missed it already and not following along with what your group is doing, is who sets the standards for what should and shouldn't be? Because you can have tenants saying, you know, this window should be replaced, or, you know, I've got mold, but it's a tiny bit. Like, who decides that? Is it the tenant can just say this needs to be done, and they could report it to the municipality to say this, please get our landlord to do this? Who's the in-between to make sure that what they're asking for is a standard?
So those standards live with bylaw. So
Right.
right now we have the M200, but they're about to upgrade it to the M201. And there
Okay.
are some very good upgrades in that, especially as Mila was saying, I don't know if you heard her or not, but about fire. So
Right.
there's going to be greater safety measures and greater standards in the M201. It's just that, and the M200 is good too. It's just there's no enforcement. There's no enforcement model. So the
Okay.
standards are already there. We're just trying to build basically the licensing so that we have the education and the responsibility there and the accountability on the landlords, and then the public database so that their infractions are public as to dissuade them in that way, and the fines to keep them basically in line with it. I mean, it is certainly a point to be made that bylaw enforcement could have been making this work all on their own for a long time. They could have actually been enforcing the standards they already had, and that's a fair point to criticize bylaw about. But since they're not, we want to bring this in. And also, even if bylaw was enforcing it on their own, that would all be behind closed doors. So this is still a much better system of public accountability. And the opportunity and the risk of buildings actually being taken away from landlords, because there's no such system right now that would ever have that outcome. Does that answer?
Oh, absolutely, because the regional municipality, HRM, operate under a charter rather than an MGA. I'm just wondering whether we afford the same, as a municipality, are afforded the same, I don't know what the word is, like being able to do the same things that Halifax does. And I'll definitely look. I didn't realize they had this you say it's a M100 or M200?
M200.
Right.
Queens County is not going to have that. Having a minimum standards guideline for rental apartments is actually quite unique. So, you know, gold star to the HRM, it's actually a really good thing to have, but it only matters if you enforce it. So
Exactly.
I think I have done some work in my private business with the municipality of Queens, and I think that you might have to kind of start a little behind where we are to just get those minimum standards created for Queens, and then go forward from there.
Can somebody post that link to the HRM website where they post this M200 guideline?
Sid has just done so there. So it's the halifax.ca City Hall link there. That has the M200.
Okay, thanks very much.
No problem. Thanks for joining us.
I really appreciate it. I mean, this is great information, and we really have to tackle this here in the region of Queens. So I'm glad that I've found your site and that we can follow along what HRM's doing and keep in touch with what ACORN's doing. I just had one other question. What are the legalities of being able to take a house away from a landlord?
Well, it's not easy, I'll tell you that. And it really, I think that everyone involved, would want it to be a last case, a worst case resort. It's not something that the city is going to want to do, but we do feel that it needs to be there as a stick to have them take things more seriously, because right now they're not taking having their building condemned seriously, and that's something that can be done. So we need them to know that that's a possibility. It has been done. Yeah, so Sid's saying here, it has been done in other places, but it's actually the province that would have to kind of deputize the city to do it. So it does go above HRM. So it would certainly have to be a situation that was extreme. And then, that's one thing we would do as an organization. We would take that case to the province and demand that they deputize the city to take the building from the person. Now, that does mean they still have to be compensated for the building. They own it. So legally, either the city would have to buy the building and become its landlord, or on the right of first refusal for the tenants could buy it as part of a co-housing initiative that they would start. So we would rather see things become co-housing than see the province or the city become the landlord, but those are both outcomes. So the landlord would receive financial compensation from one source or another, and it would have to be deputized through the province. Does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I certainly, I think that there are situations where other governments in other countries as well have taken over properties from landlords in housing emergencies. Even just recently, Spain did that during COVID. They were just like, fill these apartments or we take them from you and we put the homeless in them. So it is something that can be done, but it will be tricky and it will take pressure. I just wanted to see through the other things people have said in case there's anything here I should address. Yeah, from Doug, the rents are really getting high in Halifax. They are way beyond what people are paying, what people should be paying. I keep bringing up that, you know, any financial advisor will tell you that you shouldn't be paying more than 35% of your income to housing at most, but that is not what is happening for people. People are paying as much as 80% of their income to housing right now, especially on the peninsula. So it's a very serious problem. And just from JT, landlord licensing has potential, don't know what to agree. Warning similar cases, regular on their own terms. Yeah, I think to what you're saying, JT, this only works if people keep the pressure on until it solidifies as a way of doing things. Any kind of standardization or regulation in any industry had to be fought hard for. The only reason we have occupational and safety standards for our workplace is because of the long fights of many unions, as well as horrible injuries that people had. So getting the licensing as strong as we need to have it is step one, but then holding the city to actually enforce it as it needs to be is step two. I wish it was not such a long and hard fight, but it is. I should close the door on the phone. Okay, just seeing if there's anything else I see here. Oh, from Finn, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So how does the Airbnb situation play into all of this? Well, technically we don't want Airbnbs because they're taking up housing when we have a huge vacancy problem here. Those are kind of under their own license, like those are under their own situation. Those people are not considered landlords in the same way. Maybe I'll let Sid speak to this because it's not really, this is not intended on them in the same way that we want it for long-term renters.
Yeah, I can quickly talk about where the city's at with Airbnb. Originally, our demands as part of landlord licensing was to license and limit the number of Airbnbs as well as part of this program. Part of issuing a license is giving permission, which is a semantic thing that the city, it's a semantic line that the city is drawing between calling it licensing versus registration. They see registration as a database and licensing as giving permission to operate, which is true. So in that way, we could have regulated Airbnbs by allowing or not allowing them to open. And then holding them obviously to the standards that we hold any kind of long-term housing to. What the city is planning on doing right now is licensing and regulating Airbnbs under a hospitality tax. And so that's considerably more taxes than you would pay than on a residential property. And it also allows it's a certain number of units. So I believe I think if you have 3 or more operating in a building or the entire building is just Airbnb, you're going to have to start legally operating as a hotel because that's what it is, right? And so the hefty fines are going to limit the number of ghost hotels that are popping up around the city, and as well it's going to create a sort of list or regulation to manage that. So that's where the city's at with that.
Yeah, I mean, the fight against Airbnbs is definitely an important one. We're not going to free up more housing until we suppress the number of Airbnbs. The original intention of Airbnb, like as a business itself, was in their original idea was to have people rent rooms in their own dwelling, almost like couch surfing, but with a door. Since then, since they started with that original idea, it has become a complete business for people that all they do is run Airbnbs and they have multiple ones in a unit. So it's really become a Frankenstein of its original intention that I don't think would have caused these problems. Now it's just really out of control. And I agree with Doug, Airbnb is bad for any city. I heard in Louisiana, people's rent actually only runs from September to April for the last couple of years because they kick everyone out in the summer to make them Airbnbs for the tourists. and then they let them back in September. Like that's now a standard lease term in Louisiana is a September to April lease term. So these are the kind of things that we need to, not only do we need to stop it in its tracks and turn back time, but we certainly can't let it get any worse. Just reading here. Yeah, I think again to Finn, it would be better. I mean, it would be better for them if they're going to be taxed as much as they're going to be under what the city wants. They might as well be landlords as opposed to Airbnb if they're going to get taxed to that level. Yeah, and HRM is exactly, they're making it just as expensive as to run a hotel. I don't know whoever thought it was a good idea to just let strangers rent spaces to strangers with no regulation, but now we see what that's turned into. All right, now we're on to Sam for his section here of our agenda, speaking about how did they win in other cities for licensing and other forms of organizing. So, Sam.
Cool. Thank you very much, Hannah. I'm really enjoying this conversation, actually, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. But I always learn a lot from Sid and from you and Mila. And thanks to Lisa and Heather and everyone else for joining. Yeah, I think that landlord licensing, what it could look like, will depend a lot on what we're able to fight for as a movement. So for that, I think it's important to look at other examples. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what they did in Toronto to fight for Rent Safe Toronto, which is something like landlord licensing, though not exactly. And I just wanted to bring up, in related to the OHS, Occupational Health and Safety, just the example used there, Hannah, that historically rental licensing programs have been put into place usually after a tragedy. And even like the most recent news or the earliest news articles I could find about landlord licensing in this area was in response to something bad happening. But like you said, it's also about what we can fight for as a movement. So in my conversations with people about this, I would ask usually, or they would ask me, if landlord licensing is such a good idea, or is it a good idea as it seems like, why has it not been done yet here? Why is it not happening already? And I think the only response, and this is just personally, I think it's because there are some people who do not want there to be landlord licensing, and those people have more power than we do right now as a movement. There are many examples. People probably have heard of property developers and their companies, financing election campaigns or lobbying or threatening to divest or not do business in the area. And two examples of these sort of organizations would be the Investment Property Owners Association of Nova Scotia, whose members own over or manage or own 45,000 apartment rental units in the province, and the Nova Scotia Landlords Association, which exists primarily to help landlords increase their income, increase their wealth through what they call successful property management and investment. And of course, these organizations do not want there to be landlord licensing because it would mean that they would lose power, not just money.
Bring me a sausage on a plate with some mustard. I'm still in this meeting.
Just gonna meet you there, Hannah. Yeah. So however much landlord licensing would cost would be in the details, but we do know that any form of landlord licensing would make it so that landlords could not do whatever they want. So organizations like theirs use their wealth to get what they want, right? By financially supporting candidates in elections, by lobbying governments, and by threatening to not do business in the area. But for the rest of us, we, to get what we need, we have organizations like ACORN. We may not have wealth, but we do have people. And the question of whether landlord licensing happens or how it happens is kind of like a competition between organizations like theirs, like landlord associations, and organizations like ours, like ACORN. So they have money power and we have people power. And those with the money they're like a dominant force in society right now. And those of us with people power are down here. Since the 1970s, the beginning of the new liberal era, those with money, have been getting more of what they want. And tenants and ordinary people are down here. So in order to balance the playing field, we need to build up people power. And that can look like a lot of different things. It starts with things like the event we're having next week. So next Saturday at 1 p.m. From the Halifax Central Library, we're having a tenant speak out. It can also include things like rallies and marches, which we've also had, picket lines out front of bad buildings, office occupations, either at landlords, the businesses' offices, the organization's offices, or at politicians' offices. community gatherings like barbecues and things like that that we've had, street art and performance art. But the important thing is that all of these different actions build on each other and lead to some sort of positive structural change. So it needs to be part of the movement. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that ACORN members in Toronto have done to achieve things like this. So folks may have heard about Rent Safe Toronto. It's kind of like landlord licensing. Basically, it's a bylaw enforcement program that ensures apartment building owners comply with building maintenance standards. It applies to buildings with 3 or more stories or 10 or more units. So it's starting with the largest landlords, and owners of rental apartment buildings are required to register and comply with Rent Safe TO and to do certain things to comply. If landlords do not comply with maintenance standards, Rent Safe TO team can issue orders and charge landlords, which can result in substantial fines. The city can also have a contractor complete any necessary work and place the cost on the building's property taxes. So this is a step forward. It's not exactly landlord licensing, but it's something like we can fight for and achieve here in Nova Scotia or in HRM, but it's something that would not happen overnight. In fact, ACORN members campaigned for over many years. I think it was at least 6 years that they had it running before they got movement on it. So here are 4 things that ACORN members in Toronto did. The first thing is they had constant actions at bad buildings. Actions were held once a week for an entire year at various bad buildings, like we've had at, Nevins Avenue, around Dartmouth North, around Spryfield. And in Toronto, they were held at a variety of different buildings in a variety of different districts to prove that the issues are widespread. It created public dialogue and public press, which is the #1 way to win a campaign. And it has to be more than just us and our organization. The public needs to be on our side, and it needs to be part of a larger movement, like the housing movement, the anti-poverty movement. Having these actions dispels the myth that these issues only pertain to a few bad landlords. So people would say that there are a few good landlords, but it's landlords in general, that are at issue in this movement. And in Toronto, city councillors themselves did not believe that the problem was bad enough to warrant a program like Rent Safe TO. So that necessitated the campaign for it. It wasn't just a good idea that we're proposing, it actually needs to be enforced by a movement. Alongside those actions, they tracked progress at City Hall. So they tracked motions and bylaws that have anything to do with the demands and would have members present at to make a statement, doing press or doing an action. Members did deputations at city council meetings and met with city councillors, bylaw officials, city lawyers, and anyone who can make this happen, doing that to keep up the pressure. The third thing was to find a champion at City Hall. They found someone to put the licensing proposal forward so that the process can get started in passing it. Identify weak city councillors and flip them, so meeting with people during the election cycle or even outside of it to try to move them forward. I hope you can hear me okay. I'll just finish up and then hopefully I'll fix that in the question time. So invited city councillors to take action on this, and if they don't, assume that they don't support us or support the campaign. The fourth and final thing was to have a citywide canvas for complaints. We're doing this already, is to have a complaint canvas. So members went door to door with repair forms and filled out maintenance requests. And that the mayor's inauguration in Toronto went to City Hall and dropped off thousands of complaint forms right in front of them and to highlight how badly it's needed. And file maintenance complaints with 311. And just flood the city with complaints and keep up those various 4 things to try to put pressure and to raise the public profile of the campaign. So I'll just turn it back and see if anyone has questions about that.
One thing I'd like to touch on, just where you had mentioned where you've got property developers and whatnot who lobby in city council and things of that nature. Obviously that's part of their business interest is to get what they want. But one thing that I find, especially when it comes to landlords, is that it seems like there's obviously tenants have rights, but there's often a lot of omission or misdirection in terms of what tenants what they know their rights to actually be. So it seems like, you've got, especially with landlords, property developers, property managers, is they're in the business to make money and they want more for themselves and less for the tenants. And if you have a group of people that are capable, like that are well-educated people capable of critical thinking, that's against their interests. So it makes sense for them to argue against what we want, even though what we want is the responsible thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to emphasize that it's not personal. You know, it's business. This is the cost of doing business in any professional relationship. You know, there's licensing for landlords, there's licensing and contracts, you know, usually for employment and union contracts. So between a tenant and a landlord, or for a landlord to do business, and that way there needs to be a cost of doing that business.
Yeah, and that's one of the confusing things. Like, I don't know who among you have seen the action of what I'm going through, but that's one of the weird things about my situation is even when I was on the tenancy hearing with the owner of the property management company, she talked about how, you know, they had they're constantly making decisions about things about what properties they require to be vacant, and that I've never heard of a business in place that's trying to make money requiring a property to be vacant. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and that is, you know, one of the things about our economy, the way it currently is that, you know, it's a feature of capitalism. In order to drive up rental costs, they have to have the economy and the market working in their favor, which is absolutely not about meeting human needs first. It's about profit and private profit for them alone.
So it's Heather again. So what does the tenancy board, what role do they play in all of this? Because the people that I talk to here, like they go to the and I know right now, I don't even think the tenancy board is meeting right now because of COVID and when they're going to get back, but there's so many, and it's already backlogged. So what can people do, and what is the role of the tenancy board?
I think someone like Sid or Hannah would know more about that, although there are things I could say.
I'm okay to jump in. Yeah, so right now with the tenancy board, you're correct that they're not doing in-person meetings. They've been holding over the phone meetings and things like that. Part of the larger campaign that we're fighting for as well at the provincial level. So the Landlord Licensing and Defend Our Homes campaign is municipal, and the targets there are municipal. Obviously, everything that has to do with residential tenancies is the province. And so the provincial campaign that we have is rent reform, which is obviously the campaign that is calling for a cap on rents, so rent control. But part of that is a full review of the Residential Tenancies Act, and right now they will say they go clause by clause and review it, but we've got this Frankenstein legislation now with a bunch of parts that don't work together, and there's massive loopholes. So yeah, when it comes to enforcement of these sorts of things, and in David's case especially, and I will let David talk about that and the loopholes there, but you know, he's on a fixed term lease, so even though there's clear retaliation, you know, there's nothing that anybody can do to stop that because it's written into the Residential Tenancies Act. You can terminate those leases with no reason, right? So obviously a lot of the larger things with the Act and rentals in Nova Scotia is going to fall under the Residential Tenancies Act, and we're fighting for the reform there, you know. But when it comes to landlord licensing and at the municipal level, unfortunately, the province has not given the city a lot of power to do regulations and enforcements in that regard, which is a whole other conversation we could talk.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I hope that answers your question.
Folks can feel free to type questions into the chat if you want to jump in through audio. Hannah, if you're trying to speak, I think you're muted.
Okay, now I've been unmuted. Oh, scared my cat. With the Residential Tenancy Act, I do think that provincial campaign to get that actually thoroughly reviewed in relation to itself, clause against clause, for the loopholes and for the inaccuracies is important. But I do think that even residential tenancies has been pretty useless up till now and pretty toothless. So while they should continue to be, in my opinion, again, while they should continue to be pushed to make those reforms, I still don't think that even if the Residential Tenancy Act itself was fixed, there isn't enough manpower within that department to manage the problem. So while they should be reformed, they're never going to be enough. But that's just a Hannah opinion, but yeah. I wanted to add too to what David was saying about the certain amount of empty apartments. If a landlord or a building owner or corporation has an empty unit, they can write off the value of that as a loss that it was not rented. So it actually makes them more money to write it off as a loss at, like, let's say $1,500 a month than to lower the rent to take someone in. It's not advantageous for them to fill the space at any cost. It's more advantageous to leave the price high and call it a loss.
Interesting. I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah, it's a horrible, horrible Canadian tax loophole issue. Yeah, which is kind of beyond our scope to fix, but it's definitely a problem.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that a second? Because I do know that in some cities in Canada, I don't remember exactly which ones, I think it's out in Ontario, there are certain, the government can do certain things like tax for vacancies and things like that. So there are ways for the government to instate like laws and bylaws and things like that that can impact sort of those loopholes. Because I do know that it's somewhere in Ontario, but they have a tax on vacant storefronts so that owners can't leave them empty and call it a tax break for a loss.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for joining us, Doug. Yeah, and as Sid said, vacancy control is part of rent control. So it's while we may not be able to change the tax law, we can bring things in which penalize leaving apartments empty when we're in a housing crisis, which we definitely are. Yeah, and Sid just put a link there for the rent control campaign information. So we want to read a little bit more about that. There are so many things going on, both on the provincial level and on the municipal level. It's a lot. And just to what Sam said, about having to fight for this people power wise, I think we all know just from general life experience that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So we just all have to be very squeaky wheels together. And luckily, in a model of community care, that doesn't mean everyone has to show up at everything all the time. We can pass that off. The more people that we have, the more manageable the sort of organizing role is, and the more manageable the involvement is, the more people that we have. Yeah. And also people, I know not everybody wants to lead rallies or be super vocal, but there really is a role for every person who's interested. There's a way for you to contribute regardless of personality type or what kinds of things you're comfortable with. Just talk to us. Yeah.
Even just showing up to a rally and not saying anything and not doing anything, just standing there, the more people are at a rally, the more like the government sees like this is what people believe in, this is what they're interested in. Like even just like standing there or marching with a march and things like that. That's important stuff.
Just showing up is the most important. Does anybody have any other questions, like for any of us on anything that we've said? Okay. Well, Sid, is there anything you wanted to address based on anything that we said, correct us or add to us or anything?
No, everybody did. I mean, fantastic job, everyone. Oh, I've got a hand raised from Daryl here.
Hey, Daryl.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
That's good. Sorry, I was late, but I had to take care of a technical issue with my iPad. It was driving me crazy, but anyway, that's been fixed. Just wanted to let you know, yes, I'm going to be at the rally next Saturday. I'm off, so that works. I think it starts at 1. And I told Sid and the rest of you I plan to speak at that rally as well. because I discovered a few things yesterday I wasn't too pleased about. So I'm going to speak on Saturday.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. It is really helpful for people to just talk about your own experiences. I think everyone who's ever been a renter has a bad landlord story, which shows the magnitude of the issues. So bring that to the table. Let people know. I mean, one of the issues that I think that we have to conquer over with city councilors and with some other community members is people who have not rented since they were in university, people of a higher socioeconomic sort of status. These are not their problems. They don't know about them. And so we need to shove those issues in their face so that they know how bad they truly are. And that helps by the more stories people can share and the more variety of stories people can share.
Yeah, I mean, I've got that rally set up on Tuesday for me in front of the office for these people, and I'll come out on Saturday and basically just say the same thing and get it out there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, David. And like, I really do appreciate people sharing their stories, because especially when something is ongoing, it is emotional, it is stressful. So it's really appreciated that you're willing to share publicly.
Yeah, doesn't bother me at all.
And Sid just put up information there to fight David's eviction. I'll be there too, David. So anyone who can come and show support, just like Neela said, just stand there. It just shows solidarity. It shows support. And anything we do to help David and his family stay in their home. I think we would all want someone to do that for us if we were in the same situation. So let's support our neighbor and our own community of renters. Anything from anybody else? Well, I think we're at about an hour because we started late. So should we let people go? Yeah? Okay. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you for everyone who contributed. And definitely contact us with any questions or if you want to discuss something further with any one of us as individuals. And please come out on the 6th to help David, and come out on the 10th to our tenant speak out. And if you haven't signed the petition for landlord licensing, sign that petition, please. Thank you, Heather. Bye.